Welcome, everybody. My name is Brad Wetherick. I'm the Executive Director for the Center for Learning and Teaching as part of the Provost team here at Dalhousie, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to this webinar with Dr. Valerie Irvine from the University of Victoria. She's part of the Faculty of Education and is a Professor of Educational Technology at the University of Victoria. And it's a real pleasure to welcome you. And just before we get started, I just wanted to remind everybody, because we are recording, all of the participants' audio and video are muted, so you will not see audio and video controls for your own audio and video, but you hopefully can all hear us, hear myself and hear Valerie. And the other thing I just wanted to say, just as a very brief introduction, Valerie, you and I go way back to, I think, grad school at the University of Alberta. So thanks again for joining, and we are, I'm really excited you're able to do this for us today. Valerie has done a lot of research on what she has coined multi-access learning, the idea of actually bringing online participants into synchronous classroom contexts in all sorts of different and interesting ways. We are, because of the nature of the spread of our students across the country and around the world, you know, obviously we are using asynchronous approaches for a lot of what we do, but a lot of people have asked questions about synchronous approaches in teaching and learning, and I thought, you know, we should have somebody talk to us a little bit about kind of what does it mean to do this well, to actually use synchronous approaches well in an online space. So thank you, Valerie. I'll turn it over to you, and please ask questions in the chat. We are, I will be monitoring the chat as we go, and I will make sure that if Valerie doesn't catch something that you're able to see it. Valerie also has a Google Doc live, which I will share the link in just a second. It was shared earlier in the chat, but that's long since gone away. But this is the Google Doc link. Yeah, so if you wanted to add a question right into the Google Doc yourself, you're welcome to do so. But if you feel free to ask it either in the Google Doc or in the chat, and we'll get it going. And otherwise, over to you, Valerie. Thanks again for joining us.
Thank you. The Google Doc link is up at the 10:50 a.m. timestamp, and it's, I put that there just so I can respond more depth or with time after the presentation. But thank you, Brad, for moderating the chat for me. Yeah, so, and I will also follow up later on the Dal Online hashtag if you want to share there or tag me on Twitter. I put my logins on the home screen there. But thank you, welcome. It's nice to see well, I guess I'm not seeing you, nice to welcome all of you. I also would like to acknowledge with respect the unceded territories of the Mi'kmaq, I think I pronounced that right, people where Dalhousie is located, but also looking at these times where we're all located all over the place. So I do want to recognize and acknowledge the unceded territories from coast to coast. So thank you for that. I do want to acknowledge the TILAB, which was funded by the Canada Foundation for Innovation many moons ago. This is an older photo of it, but it allowed me to have a lot of different technologies to explore and think differently, and that's actually how I came up with multi-access learning. And I think it's first published in 2009, but before that. But today we're just as emerging modes, and we're not dealing with a physical aspect right now. It may come later, but we're just going to focus on synchronous only, online only. And so synchronous design being live, like at the same time, which is what we're doing right now. And I'd like to sort of show a picture here of this is one of our MEd cohorts. So many years ago, I've been teaching online since 1998. But before even synchronous was a possibility pretty much in online spaces. But we had our instructor from the East Coast and our cohort was on the West Coast. So it really allows a lot of flexibility. And there's lots of great affordances that come with it that you might be pleased to consider. Thinking about synchronous structures, often you're going to be faced with choices around how you use your whole group time. If you're going to be doing the breakout groups, which I encourage, which is during class, and decentralized video pods is what I call it, or DPods. this is honestly the goal, in my opinion, of being able to work online in synchronous ways and one-to-one learner connections. So one of the problems we always face is finding the common time online. I know I've had courses assigned where it just says online. It assumes everything's asynchronous for the course. So where possible, look at your registration and see if you can actually get a day and a time put in, so then everyone who's signing up for the course can figure that out. When I haven't had that, I've had to doodle poll, and fortunately with class sizes of around 35, I've been able to often find one common time. Some situations I've had to deal with two, and I just showed up twice for shorter periods just to ensure we had that connection. Or you can accept that it's synchronous somewhere. And right now, when you have your learners from around the world, it may be 2 a.m. their time for them to connect during your course time, so where you're located. So that's something to consider. I do use back channels, so Slack and things like that, a mechanism, and consider your privacy rules for your area and what you're allowed to do, but it allows that kind of connectivity just in time, or if the tech doesn't work, there's a way to reach you and to get through. So this is a little menu off of one of my course blogs. So under resources, I use things like an open agenda, which I'll show. We put our synchronous schedule up. We provide our video room link, that's for our course, but then I also provide additional video room links, and that is for the decentralized synchronous pods. And at the bottom, you'll see I have social spaces, so that's like the click on links to join your hypothesis group or your Slack back channel. And if you don't know what those are, that's okay.
Can you had a request to define back channel already, so
yeah. So back channel is just like texting. Like, it's a place where honestly, email can be considered a back channel, but you're not necessarily set to have it notify you, putting on push or what have you. So often I have it going constantly on my my desktop. You can mute it or mute a channel on it. I also can install Slack on my phone, so it will actually operate just like texting if you want to set it to that on your phone. And that way, if a student puts a comment there, it texts on your phone and I can respond quickly. I'm a big believer that synchronous reduces the time you might otherwise deal with. Like email, people will write you a letter, and then you have to write a letter back or redirect them. I really try and encourage, let's have a back channel and push to video room quickly to have that 2-minute conversation to answer something, to save me carefully composing for 10 minutes an email. And that's in print, and then you can go off and you can't interject with wait, this conversation is going the wrong way, it's simpler, let's go this way. So I really encourage those things, and that's what I put under social spaces. For these things, it depends on where you're at. You may be in a learning management system like Moodle. I use WordPress course blogs with public outward-facing aspects, but I put some of the posts protected, which means they have to have a password to get in, or there's different ways you can set that. And that's because you can see there's like grayed out areas. I don't want the URLs to be public, the meeting IDs to be public, and then we know about Zoom bombing and what have you, but I still prefer to keep those things in. But we often think about the instructor room and the class video room, but I like having static breakout room links, that there's always a video room standing, so a learner group could say, I'll meet you in breakout room 2 at 1:30 on Saturday Pacific time. Awesome. Or if they go in there and someone's in there, like, oh, let's move over to room 4. But having that static time where they can have their small group connections, I think, is really important. So, and in considering your whole group, so there's the instructional hours. So at UVic, it's 36 hours, I think, per course, per term. So it's 3 hours per week that we deal with. Think about how you want to use that time. You don't have to, and I encourage you not to have that 3 hours of synchronous time. Find other ways to communicate the content that you have. I tend to do it in thirds. 1 hour whole group time, 1 hour for that's expected of them to have their decentralized learning pods synchronous time, and then I have 1 hour of sort of expected asynchronous access to resources. So if you're going to record a video for them that you want them to watch, or break it out from your synchronous time where you're more discussion based. So that's typically my my strategy there.
Sorry, before you jump on, can I just ask, do you, so obviously it's relatively easy to record the whole group time. Do you also record the decentralized learning pods so that people can access them after the fact, or?
No, like I'm not participating in those. That's like their group work, I encourage them to read each other's blogs, to go over the readings, if they have projects that they work together, I try and make those projects assigned to a pod, which also encourages them to gather with the same group. But I don't record those. I often actually even try not to record the whole group, because I do find that it affects the discussion, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But it depends on what you're doing. If you're communicating, the emphasis on relationships, then I don't record my conversations with relationships. So encouraging that people connect with me at a later time, or connect with a subgroup. If we communicate and are open about our learning outcomes and open about our resources and are accessible for discussions, those can happen in different ways. So I try not to have the one-size-fits-all piece. And if you do record it, you may find some people who may have some more anxiety around being recorded, being quiet. That said, if you have the video off, audio off, chat anonymized, and it's recorded, that's great, but we're not going to have the interaction that we would have. Granted, you can make it recorded in a restricted area, but even so, I think it affects people's participation level and comfort level. So it's a choice you can make. It depends on how important it is for you to have it recorded versus connecting and communicating in some other way at another time if they can't make it. So this is the open agenda. So I do encourage that when we do meet synchronously, I provide a mechanism for them to put their own questions in, questions about the course, or if there's a broader program in which it's sitting in. This was for an MEd. I do the same thing for undergrad, where across the week they can say, oh, I want her to address this, or I don't understand that. They populate it. So when we do have our group time, I have that to inform what we're going to talk about as well. So it's not just a top-down thing, it's bottom-up. What are their needs? What are their questions? And I find this to be a real valuable hack. So something else for you to consider. There's the idea of also blending synchronous and asynchronous. So when you have your instructional hours in a registration system, if it's Monday, Wednesday, Friday from 10 to 11, well, if you plan on blending the synchronous and asynchronous, you don't need all of that time, right? And yet they may be planning childcare or someone watching something or not booking something because they're expecting it to be in all those times. So we have to find ways now to communicate. It could just be in the course outline, but ideally to have our registration system more customizable about when actually you're expected to be online synchronously. And this is how I've incorporated the decentralized synchronous times. It could be that you keep those times, the Monday or the Friday from 10 to 11, let's say, and say that's when you're expected to work with your group. You may not be there, or you may be there and bomb into each groups and check in. And that could be much like using the decentralized pods, but as a breakout. But often I find that they may have other times that they want to meet that's best for them. So it doesn't necessarily have to be in the time slot that you may have booked. So in using whole group time, I've really enjoyed, and the learners have enjoyed, chapter remixes. So if they have to read some thick chapter and maybe it's dry, right? How to also not hear from you all the time as the instructor. So I encourage them to actually present and to put together what I consider a remix, like Cole's notes, bring it down, make a presentation, share it. Every single class, it looks differently. The tools that they use to communicate the essential parts of the chapter, how they remixed it, is different. The voice who's presenting it is different, and it actually, and then you're there as the instructor to make sure there's not, no inaccuracies. You can correct on the spot or make sure there's no pieces missing. If people are not doing the reading, at least it's a catch up for them. So, but it allows it to be more dynamic and changing, and I found it quite, the learners are quite engaged with that route. Use the class time for discussion, and then is another option, sort of flipping it, and that's much better in my opinion than the lecturing. And the breakout groups, which you can do predetermined and break them out, or you can randomly assign them. and that's usually within the video software that you're using.
Yeah, so that's certainly something that Collaborate can do right away. You can just create breakout rooms quite easily. But can I just ask really quickly before you go on, what kind of size class do you find works as kind of a maximum for this kind of
For
whole group sessions? So we have lots of classes that are at Dal that would be under 10 students, where this is obviously possible. But we've also got classes that are much larger, and so I guess at what point do you find the kind of whole group starts to break down? Do you know, or you have thoughts?
Well, if you use breakouts and you send everyone to groups of 5 and bring them back, I mean, if the technology allows for those numbers, I actually don't really see it being too much of a limit there. But the ability to actually be available synchronously, and even just if you had like a 200-person class like we're doing right now almost, you know, we're still doing it. It's just we're not allowing all the videos and all the audio. So it'll shift. So it's not that you can't do it. It'll shift the pedagogical approach that you are using. So so I wouldn't not do it. I think for learners, there's that presence is a nice thing, as opposed to just watching a video. Being there, being able to be responsive to a question that's not like checking an email. I think that sense of presence is important for community building, even if you end up with a large class. But I've often done these things with class sizes of 25, 35, 45, and you can just change the size of your pods, right? Or how many pods you have. I've often used 4, sometimes 5 with the pods. But again, it sort of depends on the approach that you like. So lecture tips on this: avoid long text on slides. And I really mean it here. That's why I kind of use this as an example. If you do want to dig a little deeper, there's multimedia learning theory. You can find a handbook by Mayer. And you want to try and use things like use it for prompts and use it for discussion with your synchronous time. But if you're going to end up with a lot of text, you could create a version or another resource that is just, here's the content you can just read through, because reading it through doesn't really, live doesn't really work. Multimedia learning theory says that if I'm to read you this text while you're trying to read it, it's bad signaling for how our brains work. So it's best to try to avoid reading to a class. So, you know, using photos, something like this, and putting something up that is a prompt for you to have, you know, prepared what you're going to say to this, as opposed to having a whole bunch of pieces. So this could be a prompt for me to think about, you know, learning design. So predetermining for everybody, you know, what is the pathway that they're going to take for the course. Everyone's going to read this chapter. Everyone's going to do this quiz. Everyone's going to write this paper. Honestly, we've really predetermined that learning experience for them. There's pros with that, standardization and what have you, but I'm a big fan of allowing learners to personalize their learning pathways more so, and mentoring that route. So this is an example of Trello, where I've used this with class sizes of 35, where learners actually put in their to-dos and their plans, and it could be, often it's more like a column that's to do, a column that's doing, and a column that's done, and you can go in there. It's great for grad mentorship too, to say, you know, oh, you should read this, and then see how they're working. If something's stuck on the to-do column, then it's, you know, there's maybe a reason, maybe they need help with that, but allows you to kind of pace through and see that. And this is one of the benefits of or actually for group work too. You can have groups working on a project together and see how many activities they have, like who's doing what. It has some log data there, so there's accountability for group work. So this is more on learning pathways. Claire Major.
Is Trello free, or is that something you have to pay
Trello's
for?
free. You can opt for paying for teams, but I do a free hack. I just do a naming pathway where I put a 2020-09 EDCI 33602 A02, you know, and then the learner name kind of thing, and it allows it to bunch by section. Teams allows you to group them by section, but you can definitely use it for free. The local high school here is an inquiry-based high school, the Pacific School for Innovation and Inquiry. They use it in a free mode. It's a really great tool, and you could set it for notifications and what have you. But it's kind of like a project management. It was from agile sort of tech development workplaces, but it's when you're learning, we need to consider project management for learning, right? And a lot of learners end up using it for planning for what they have to do in all their different classes. So, so going back to this learning pathways. So Claire Major from University of Alabama has depicted this with centralized, decentralized, and mesh approach. And this can be kind of seen as modalities. It can be seen as how we address curriculum. So centralized is kind of what we're doing right now. I'm the core here. Everyone's listening or providing comments inwards. When you do your breakout groups or create your decentralized learning pods, you're creating this kind of structure. And moving towards mesh is like more of your free inquiry, where go out into the world and talk to people or talk to whoever it works for you. And that kind of is a little bit more of the grad approach too, right? From the first year large lecture, we end up moving towards this. I like to try and figure out like how can we make those first year large lectures, more, shifting more to the right. So for decentralized synchronous pods, these are a few examples shared with consent. So we have remote individuals. So these three are two from BC, one from Manitoba, and they love getting together. It's quite rich. I joined a early childhood education MEd cohort and just taught one course in their program, and introduced this synchronous podding and gave them the breakout video rooms that they could access whenever. They loved it so much they actually went to the next instructor, was like, can we just keep this in? Can we keep this going? And I find the same thing in my own programs and my own classes. They really appreciate that way of connecting and having that intimate conversation. It can be also done in our multi-access designs. We have some people from very northern sort of British Columbia, Fort St. James, where they were able to pod it together, although in a face-to-face way. So that is, in my opinion, the gold work. But think about
before you move on, do you have a request for you to expand a little bit more on the mesh, if you can?
Mesh, yeah. So free inquiry, actually, if remind me or put in the notes to share an image from Trevor McKenzie. It's a K-12 teacher who's put together a really nice swimming pool image of the deep end and the shallow end, and how you have swimming lessons, right? So if you're a new swimmer, you're in the shallow end and you've got your instructor telling you, everyone like do this, everyone do that. As you move towards mesh, which is more, I would say, more free inquiry, and it depends. I like to talk about these things both in terms of curriculum and in terms of modality. But as you get more free inquiry from a curriculum point of view, it's less the instructor telling you, read this, do this paper, and it's more, here's the outcome. How do you see yourself meeting it? What questions do you have for an inquiry, and how it's honestly closer to graduate student mentorship, and shifting how we can do that. And if this is done at the high school level, we can do this at the university level. Granted, it will be more challenging with a class of 200, but I still believe there are ways that we can do that, drawing more from mentors in the field and peer assessment. But you can go towards guided inquiry or free inquiry, which is you pick it, and that is more your PhD. Like you pick the focus, what your inquiry question is, find the resources that match that, talk to the experts who work on that, create something from that. So that is from a curriculum point of view of your instructional approach. So the other angle is you're gathering, your synchronous sort of approaches of structure in a class, and that is, if you don't necessarily have so much of this centralized time, and you create that community, maybe two learners are connecting together, they ping others and join together in a pod of three, or have a half group join up randomly, or tweet to actually bring other people in. It's a lot less formalized in terms of structure. Does that help?
Yeah.
And definitely UDL guidelines. I want to be able to chat through all these chats. I'm happy to stay on after the recording stops to keep talking with people as well. I would actually say free inquiry is more UDL than centralized from an exclusion point of view in terms of modality, but also from a point of view of supporting people to personalize how they meet outcomes. And if you personalize, and support more free inquiry, it's the learner that's at the center of the design. So it is more aligned, in my opinion, than UDL. So yeah, skipping ahead.
So going to your, just quickly on your pod slides, we had a question about what kind of recommended size you use for pods, and also pros and cons of having people stay in the same pods versus mixing up the pods as you go along. So
yeah, I often let them self-form their pods. It depends. I mean, if you're teaching a class that has a variety of very different backgrounds, and they may need to personalize the topic to the health sector, to the business sector, then maybe grouping by their disciplines makes more sense, so they have that common language and applications of what they're thinking. But I often look at pods of 4. But that said, you could go to 5, you could go to 3. It's sort of up to you and your design, what you think makes sense. But I often do around 4 is my target. And in these cases, sometimes it's naturally forming, not in online environments per se, but when I do multi-access, if I have half the people coming in from across the province and there's a pod of 3, then they became a pod just in terms of how they're connecting the class. This group is doing a 3-part, like a 3-way MEd project together. They're collaborating on everything and they love it. So they're getting that intimate community, which, being in Fort St. James and UVic being in Victoria, it's nice for them to have that sense of community. So it can be naturally emergent, but definitely I will randomly assign. I think it's nice to have a pod that goes throughout the entire course. So it's that regular, I know I'm meeting my group on Tuesdays at 4, and it's in there, and not having that change up all the time. Again, know your learners, know your community. If someone's got a really bad group, then you may need to look at shifting that up, and maybe there's ways you can take input for that. So things to consider on why decentralized learning pods. I joined an impromptu meeting once, and it was a great conversation. I was, hearing stuff, but it still ended up kind of falling into these quiet times where they deferred to me. Then I had a playdate pickup, so I went to the answer the door. I muted my mic and my camera, came back, but I just sat there without them knowing I was attending what was going on. I was listening to the conversation of the learners. It was so rich, and it was richer than when I was present. So I turned back on my mic and my camera, and then whoop, it stops again. They defer to me. And so recognizing that your role as the authority or the teacher, it ruins the dynamic. So I think for building community in a class, sometimes it's good not to be part of the community. And that's the benefit of the decentralized synchronous pods, is recognizing that we impact the communication. So not that the whole class is unstructured and doing that, but we want them to have those intimate small group conversations. It's like when you say, okay, this group go in that corner, that group go down to the library, it's the same kind of thing. When they're doing that, they can be buzzing. They can also be off topic, but if they have deliverables they have to meet, they will inevitably be on topic. And if they need to be off topic to support each other and develop friendships, that's healthy. So, and the other thing I've done is synchronous online conferences, so like the EdCamp idea. So in our synchronous class of this one, we had 25. We, in the week before, posted a SurveyMonkey survey and asked for what people's favorite topics were. And then we gathered those up, made another survey. Please rank these topics and choose your top 3. And then I took that, determined what was upvoted, assigned them to video rooms, and it was our online EdCamp. So our class of 25, we had now people, some room topics were on Indigenous learning, others were on cross-curricular inquiry, and we had people joining us from other provinces, from Australia, you know, and it allowed this great layering in of people, and that created more ability for those people who had more specific interests to actually have someone else come in that they had common sharing with. So that's something else that you can explore. Yeah, hopefully Deb can get her audio fixed. All right, so that's something you can consider as a strategy for your synchronous class. And one of the greatest affordances that you will have over being face-to-face is your ability to access anyone, anywhere. So this is a photo of my colleague, George Leziano. So if you have readings, you know, articles, blogs, books, whatever it may be, reach out and ask the person, do you want to come in and talk to our class? So in my class last July, every single day we had a guest come in for a portion because we had the reading assigned, and I think it was 100% response rate of asking people to come in. And the feedback from the learners were like so strong that they felt the research came alive for them because the person was right there, and being able to ask direct questions. It made also the idea of scholarship being something, you know, that was real and not this distant thing that other people do, that it came closer for them. So and I've also been pinged just myself lately, one learner from California, another one from Wisconsin, asking to do interviews for their assignments, and I'm happy to do that for their learning. So definitely, and that could be a pod-based thing. We had a
question came up around, did you pay the guests? Just out of curiosity.
No. Never paid a guest ever. And everyone always is gracious and giving of their time. And I think you'll find that it sort of falls into that service aspect of academia, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're only inviting, you know, people who are professors. There's lots of other resources and important folks to bring in. If you're going to be doing something where it's interviewing, getting data, presenting kind of thing, then consider your course-based ethics. But this was more just for bringing in and having conversations. We also did reading. One pod pitched that they did like a book club as an assignment and reflected with blog posts. So that was really rich as well. So and then they actually tweeted at the author of the book. The author said, yeah, I'll come and talk to you. They gave the link, and then they had this New York-based author. So really, really, really consider the wide open world here. And those can be learner to guest directly, learner to learner individual synchronous connections, and then instructor to learner one-on-one. Consider your office hours, and also I do assessment interviews. So switching over to think about assessment. I have lots of memories, especially biology, of memorizing terms. It's helpful, but it's not exactly the best way to inspire, you know, engagement. You might remember this, Brad, the Crane Group at U Alberta. It's a Center for Research on Applied Measurement and Evaluation. I believe I got that right. Incredibly knowledgeable people in measurement. So your statistics, your psychometrics, all of that. This is their current text that they assign their learners in the 507 course on measurement theory. It's really interesting, really important, really good to strive to assign things that are accurate in that regard. But in classical test theory, this is the formula. It's a mathematical thing. The observed score, so that's the mark that you're giving someone. It's your observed score. It is supposed to represent their true score, but obviously you've got error. So error could be they're tired, they're stressed in a pandemic. It's a lot of error. Lack of sleep. It could be cultural differences, language differences, anxiety and cortisol levels go up, so then they're not actually communicating what they know. So the more we think about this, and the fact that what I learned when I was doing my coursework over there was that teacher made assessments or instructor made assessments has a 0.4 reliability on a scale of 0 to 1, which means it's fairly unreliable, right? It's not, in their mind, it was throw it out, we need standardized exams. Try to improve what you can do. Definitely try to improve it, but I think this also gives us an opportunity to rethink our assessment and to think, how much is our assessment actually harming true score in and of itself? Is it stressing people out, making them pull back? Is it reducing engagement? Is it actually affecting learners' interest in learning? And if that's the case, I don't know. It's more of a philosophical question. It'd be a really challenging design to come up with to determine that. But I also think about this quote from Albert Einstein. I typed this out on my computer in the 80s, and so I printed it out. I found this note in my stash somewhere. The worst thing seems to be for a school principally to work with methods of fear, force, and artificial authority. Such treatment destroys the healthy feelings, the integrity, and self-confidence of the pupils. All it produces is a servile helot. And not that we're working with fear or force, but I like the term artificial authority. If what we're doing and what we're creating, tests, exams, and things, actually are not designed well and have poor reliability, can't we then take that as maybe we should care about the healthy feelings, the integrity, the self-confidence, and developing those learners? And if we accept that, what we create is fraught with error, and especially during a pandemic, then we can let go. We can maybe allow repeated attempts for understanding. We can take risks with our pedagogy, focus on relationships, especially here. Our course evaluation scores are not being considered apparently at our institution. That is the best time to take risks and to try new things, because if they don't work out, it's not high stakes. So I like to focus on shifting to considering how do we support learner potential through personalization, more of the mesh type of stuff as we can, more connecting them with the networks of guests and people globally and to each other, openness in terms of, let them find open resources and consider ways to participate in open events. Look at assessment for learning as opposed to assessment of learning, and consider access. When we are moving beyond face-to-face only, we are actually allowing greater access. And if you have any grad students, now's the time where, if, we have Western Dean's Agreement, which says you can take courses at other institutions in Western Canada and count it to your program, but you have to physically be there to take them because they're face-to-face courses often. Well, this is a beautiful window to actually, let your grad students access any course from across the country, probably, or beyond, and look at ways, to reflect on that and how, when we pick a modality, we're restricting access. So for the intersections of synchronous communication and assessment, I like doing assessment interviews. I have class sizes of 35, 25, that kind of thing. I understand it'll be harder with higher numbers, but you can look at peer assessments. I do one-on-one meetings. If I think I'm going to spend 10 minutes marking something, I'd rather actually have the learner there with me for those 10 minutes and have a brief chat and go over it. You have to be tight and really, have a structure of here's the questions and here's what I need to have. It's so much more rewarding as an instructor. It's less isolating, and I hear the same from the learners as well. So I do encourage them to self-assess. What do you think your mark is? And then often they underestimate themselves. And one time I had someone actually say they thought they deserved a higher mark. I asked them to reveal before I reveal what I had. And for the person who asked for a higher mark or self-assessed, I reflected on it. I said, okay, well, I had this. Let me go back and consider it. I considered it, and I thought this person did not dress polished compared to another learner. They had a background that was not a professional background. So I was thinking all these biases that may have fed into, this very low reliability assessment that we do. And I went and looked at the others that had grades, in the same band. This learner had grades, and I realized that it was me, that I was the problem. So I think these things are good that we actually have these open conversations. You'll find it rewarding, in my opinion, to explore assessment interviews. If you are going to be doing blogging as assignments for learners or any kind of writing in that regard, be aware once you pivot to online, watch your workload. If you assign one blog post weekly or one after every class, it's 20 minutes-ish, depending on the length, but let's say it's like 500 words. It takes 20 minutes, honestly, to mark. By the time you comment, you want to reach out, it takes 20 minutes. So if you have 25 students, that's 8.3 hours per blog post to mark. So again, revisit the learning pods for peer assessment in terms of that feedback for each other. And I ask them to pick their favorite one for me to mark out of a selection. So strategies like that. And then when I do that one, I like to do it with them there. So the synchronous marking, I do track changes in a collaborative document. We'll share a Google Doc, or if it's in a Word with track changes, share a screen and send it to them after. I find that sometimes it's better than that cryptic comment, and sometimes it's a teachable moment for them. Sometimes it's me realizing, oh, that's what you meant. Well, then you have to put a period in there and maybe write it this way. I get it now. And we're actually developing it moving forward for them. And I find it really wonderful. I also use Hypothesis for marking up blogs. So you can find that it's an ethical ed tech tool. So it can be anything that's on the web. You have to be careful, it defaults to public. So you'd have to make sure you create a private group between you and every student. So this is not for your 100-person class unless you have your peers wanting to comment on each other's work using Hypothesis. And when I do give feedback, I tend to use the word from the grading scale. I don't say, I just think it's silly to say you've got 76% for this blog post. I'd rather not even say you got an A, because it affects the community, it affects the relationships. A on the grading scale means, let's say, I can't remember what it means, but is that excellent? Or is that an A minus, whatever it is. But let's say it's excellent. I'll say this is an excellent post. I tell them from the get-go, that's going to correspond to a letter. I'd rather use the words, and it gets us not so focused on the grades. There's still a grade entered on a spreadsheet, but I like to hold back on that. This is an example of Hypothesis shared with consent, where I can basically, it's like markup, and I can put the comments right on the blog. So it's not trying to take comments, put it in an email or some document, and it rests in their piece.
We have a question about how you might use a rubric around that, and
yeah, so assessment in terms of rubrics and things like that. It depends on your approach. If you're moving towards more free inquiry, then you're going to be co-constructing your expectations of what makes a good, whatever the assignment is, if it's a video, if it's a paper, that would be co-constructed. If you're going to be providing something, I'm kind of an anti-rubric person in a way, but if you are going to be doing that, having the scales, of examples of what is a low and what's a high. So it could be that they need to have, 10 references, like for a category of supporting yourself. Are they, peer reviewed or by experts, or is this like Googling some corporate website, and what are you bringing in and marking them on that? You can make rubrics. I've done it before where I've just, selected and shaded a cell, and so they can actually see on their feedback, where they situated. And so definitely you can use that. And if that ends up corresponding to a grade, again, I like to use the words. It's not that there's not grades. We have to do that. Is how to communicate that, and where you want your emphasis to be. We need to give feedback. I don't think it's very good to actually give 77% to learners, and especially in a pandemic. I just think we need to de-escalate the stress as much as possible. And I have made calendar changes. So we've moved some of our courses to pass fail, and one of mine is a complete incomplete. And I use assessment interviews instead for that. And we go over things orally, and you can actually have oral assessment. It's used all the time in K-12. We actually could learn a bit from K-12 in this. And we use it all the time in grad studies too.
A question was asked about how and when do you allocate times for synchronous grading? Like, how do you manage that?
Yeah. So is that on the next slide, maybe? No, I might not be. So I use Google Doc. You can use Calendly, where they basically, if you want to use a Google spreadsheet, they don't have to put their name in. I put the FIPA stuff at the top, and they can just put their name in or put booked in a 10 minutes segments. And I usually try in my schedule to leave like a 5-minute gap in between, but and I will not exceed more than 4 or 5 in a row, and I just have that as my marking day, and you'd go from meeting to meeting to meeting. it may be something that you like. It may be something you don't. I've found that the people who've tried it have enjoyed it. They actually, for the first time, I actually sat down with an undergrad student. I never do that. You know, I got to see everybody, and you learn a little bit more about them, and it brings the humanity back into the marking, and it's less isolating. And especially now, it'll be less isolating, and you make sure you connect with people. And we are the front line for our learner supports. I know our institution said that we are the front line, like in terms of getting them access to, healthcare, to counseling, to, emergency funding support or what have you. And if we don't even see them, how are we going to do that in a pandemic? So I do think it's something to consider. But you're going to have to communicate. It's tight, and let's talk a little bit. But they will, if there's something bubbling up for them, they'll say it. And then you can support them with the next steps. So next, I just wanted to do parting advice. This is just, overall things. Wear pants. There are a lot of things that go sideways when you're doing things synchronously. This just came out the other day as a reporter that forgot his camera angle, and got kind of caught on camera in that regard. We all know this story. Secure a quiet space. I took my cordless phone from here and I moved it downstairs, and there was a phone call I could hear faintly. At least it wasn't next to me. I turned off my printer. Sometimes it updates and makes sounds. So you have to think about the interruptions. And I put a note on my door that says "on a call," posted on the outside of my door, so my family knows don't come in. Although that little one there probably wouldn't be paying attention to a post-it note. So figure out what you can do to secure a quiet space. Think about lighting and camera angle. So in this, you want your lights in front of you. So I have a whole bunch of like lamps and things on this end behind the screen, and I've closed the drapes behind me. So you want to reduce lights behind you, and you also want to avoid mixing natural light and artificial light. Consider your camera angle. So often people start slouching or moving, and trying to keep a consideration of that. Resolving network issues. I find that this is often skipped on a lot of people's orientations. They talk about them muting the mics and things like that. Tell your family not to stream. So I told my family, no Netflix, no YouTube videos. You have to get offline or just work just on a Word document. But it will compete for the bandwidth, and your learners need to know this too. And certainly you can't, if there's things beyond your household you can't control, that's life. Using the 1-800 numbers to connect via audio by phone is something that can happen if bandwidth is a problem, but addressing that. I always do test calls the week before class starts. I do like 2 or 3 dates. I say show up to the room on these times if you can make it. If none of those times work, then arrange a one-on-one with me. And I put standards on the course outline of what kind of internet they need to ensure that they have. It's like 10 megabytes. And then if, again, during a pandemic, access emergency student funds or what have you, if internet's something they can't afford or they don't have the tools, that would be next steps. But addressing it before the class starts is important and helpful. Security. So consider, like I didn't put the links publicly, so be aware of that. Try and use the waiting rooms or different aspects of how you can control who can access your room. Make sure that you don't end up with someone coming in and, you can Google Zoom bombing for a lot of the stuff that was happening on that platform. Be careful with that, and be careful of your copyright. So if this is recorded, you have to think of attribution. So this is a Creative Commons image, and I hyperlinked this to the actual image link. And oh, I did change the name, mea culpa. Oh well, I was coming back to put the person's username in there. And this is a linked license, the Creative Commons license. So putting in the attributions either on the slide or at the end of slide. We also have fair use, which is where our government says we actually can use copyrighted stuff in certain instances, and they list them. But be aware once you're shifting to online and synchronous that you get that right. Establish your etiquette. So I put this on course outlines that they are not to be like connecting from a Wi-Fi, and it doesn't really apply now so much, but from Starbucks or a swimming pool watching their kids in a lesson, or Wi-Fi at the beach might be more likely here, where the sounds, when they talk could be a problem, and the Wi-Fi may be unreliable because it's shared with many. Turn off the notifications, mute your mics when you're not talking, wear a headset, and get a helper to watch the chat. Those are important pieces. Beware of your screen sharing. Often we'll screen share and open up a document and something like that. If you're recording especially, and also you have to be aware they might be recording your entire video. So think of privacy from that regard, and think about what private information might pop up. I always go to my Mac and turn off, I set it to do not disturb so you don't get a personal image or message popping up. And consider the privacy of your learners, where they have the right not to have their camera on, in my opinion. I know some people who think that's a requirement. I don't think that's a requirement, especially when they're in their personal space. There may be different reasons for them not wanting to share their video. I know others try to do text more than talking synchronously. I support all of that. I believe learners have a variety of different angles, and some of them are true accommodations. And having that discussion in class, hey, why is not your video on? So skip that stuff and handle it and communicate one-on-one if you have something like that, as opposed to calling them out. And reconsider mics. We all mute mics, so we say mute your mic, but then we end up with a silent class. And when someone laughs, if someone makes a joke, you don't hear the laughter, and that I find a bit of a problem. And I know that having people's mics not muted creates more noise and things like that. You can get used to going to your instructor bar and being able to click on a noisy sound, and mute someone's mic individually. That, I think, is, I would rather be responsive and cut out the loud noise here and there and allow a community-based laughter to come in. It depends, on the high stakes and things like that, but I do like collective laughter versus those, the silence and the avoiding risk. So that's your call, but just always reconsider that and the impact it does make. On our next steps, as we look at merging back in, you can reach out to me if you're interested in multi-access learning, which is merging the modes. It's allowed, this is a graphic from my 2013 paper, allows people to pick the modality in which they can participate in your class. When I have allowed merging modes, we've had like half the learners on campus mixed with half online. We've had oversubscription for programs, so if registration's an issue, it's a solution for that as well, and allows bringing in folks from, Fort St. James who don't have the privilege of a university in their backyard, or they have to pay 3 times the tuition to access an online university. So those are some of the things that to consider. And last thing, if you're going to end your call, awkward, signing off, it's awkward. And so what I do is I ask everyone to unmute their mics, and then we do a countdown, 3, 2, 1. We all shout goodbye at the same time and wave, and as we hang up. And I always tell them beforehand that I will stay on the call after for anyone who has some one-on-one questions, and if there are a few, I take a list and I will message them on our back channel, or to come in when the other one's left. So those are some things to consider for a happy kind of, I don't know, it feels energetic when you do it that way as a sign off versus the anticlimactic slowly dying off route. So I know I just did like a major dump, but there, hopefully all of that stuff will be helpful, and I will go to the Google Doc and catch up on questions there. I know there was a ton of conversation on the chat. It's just for the number of people here, I'm just opted to get a message out and catch up after, which I am accessible. There's my email, there's my Twitter, and I will use the Google Doc if we can put the link in again. Yeah. Oh,
Sure. Sure. I'll actually add the link right now. I have been cutting and pasting questions from the chat into the Google Doc, but certainly there's way more vibrant things happening in the chat, of course. The one thing I will just there's an important question that was asked by one of the participants, and I just wanted to touch on it if you can. And thinking about the managing workload in the use of synchronous versus asynchronous pedagogies, and how do you think about you know, how you manage your time? Does it mean that you're spending more time than you would normally do spending for a face-to-face class, or how do you think about kind of managing time in this kind of pedagogical approach?
Over my years, I found that just having short synchronous can cut a lot of noise. You will get, in the asynchronous world, you'll start getting a lot of individual emails and those kind of messages, and it's attending to a lot of them, and they tend to be repetitive. And of course, you can do that in a forum online, but still, even then, you'll get these long emails individually. And I just find that if I can push people to a quick synchronous individual message, if it has to be, I prefer that. And I prefer having a synchronous whole group period as well. Think about right now, often like considering the socioeconomic status and home, people may be living in studio apartments, isolating, not living with family members. They really need to connect, and I think we, from a pedagogical point of view, you know, we need to support that. Irrespective of content and your course outcomes, we need to, number one, support community building and mental health through connection. And connection, in my opinion, is for most people stronger synchronously than it is asynchronously. So I would support both. But from workload, I think if you have those synchronous times, they get their fill, and then they get their questions answered, and then they retreat till the next week. So from a workload, I think it's lower, and I think from a community building, mental health, socially supporting each other, it's stronger. So. Yeah, and that's the other thing. If a course is fully asynchronous, it's very easy to engage. Yes, both as an instructor and as a learner. It's easy to disengage. And so it's actually an accountability piece, showing up and being there. So, yeah.
So we had a session yesterday with Rick Schweer from the University of Saskatchewan, and it was all about building community. And I find there are ways to build community asynchronously, but it's certainly I find it much easier if you, even if you're using just small micro synchronous sessions, it aids building community significantly. So.
And even if you're like, heck no, as an instructor, I am not going to, I refuse to do synchronous for whatever reason, I would disagree with that. But if you do that, don't block them from engaging. Still put in the synchronous pods for them to have links to connect as learners. Even if you don't choose to participate in that, let them and not let them, encourage them to meet in groups.
Well, thank you so much. This has been excellent. I am going to actually stop the recording now.